On today's show, we're crossing it over with the host of Locked On Oilers, Nick Zararis, to discuss both teams on a macro level, how the Panthers can bounce back after a disastrous Game 4, and the Panthers have a chance to win the Stanley Cup on home ice.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. I want to thank everybody making these shows their first listen of the day. Before we get to today's show, it's brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Very happy welcoming back Armando Velez to Locked On Oilers. Hello, friends over there on Locked On Panthers. Glad to be back here as well. We didn't get swept. We have an episode to do today, so let's get on into it. We'll start with the macro, and I'll ask you this very first simple question. If the Oilers are going to stay alive in this series, what are the Panthers not doing? Because I feel like that was kind of the case on Saturday. It wasn't that the Oilers did anything particularly great. It's more so that the Panthers just made mistakes that they had in the first few games.
And honestly, for the Panthers making their mistakes, you could also go back to Game 3, where when the Panthers capitalized, it was the Edmonton Oilers making their own fair share of mistakes. So when the series really shifted to Edmonton, that's really where the goals came from both teams. So it's like a lot of back and forth, like flip a coin for who's going to capitalize and for both teams who's going to step up too for them, because in Game 3 it was the superstars for the Florida Panthers getting in on the score sheet, Barkov, Tarasenko too, and Sam Reinhart, and then in Game 4 it was finally the star power for the Edmonton Oilers getting on the score sheet too. So that's another thing for them. And it's crazy because you were talking about us recording, and it's a 2-day gap. And with Edmonton getting the 8-1 margin and the Florida Panthers coming off that loss, you wish you were just playing immediately.
I go back and forth on that. I think for Edmonton, it might have helped if it was less of a layoff. I do think Florida having a game like that, the more separation you have in terms of actual time, I do think that helps flush it. I don't think you want to read too much into a game like that very clearly. Kind of just got out of hand very quickly. And that happens. You know, there were blowouts. You go back, you look at some of the box scores from Stanley Cup Finals of recent memory. I know a lot of people will point at the Boston-Vancouver one, where as soon as that series went back to Vancouver, the Bruins outscored them 12-2 over 2 games. Ultimately, the Bruins did go on and win that series, but offensive explosions like that are, like you said, they're products of mistakes. It's one team really kind of messing up, and you mentioned it. In Game 3, it was the Evan Bouchards of the world. That's somebody who, if the Oilers are going to win, he can't be making mistakes. But big picture, we're looking at the series now, going into Game 5 tonight. How do you feel about how Florida's played?
I feel really good about that, because I mean, in Game 1 when the Florida Panthers weren't, how they responded after Game 1, with the Florida Panthers not giving up as many breakaways, we've seen that they have the ability to adjust. And for that Game 4 loss on Saturday night, it was their first loss in exactly 20 days for them too. And it's crazy. It's crazy for the Panthers going into this, winning the first 2 at home, but they got their mission done of getting a split in Edmonton. You wanted to get the sweep, obviously, but like I said in my recent episodes, sweeps are hard to come by. It hasn't happened in 26 years. So a slight setback for the Florida Panthers there. I mean, even Maurice, he had a great quote today after practice, and talking about the opportunity that's right in front of him. And he said, quote, "The feeling of the goal sits in front of the game that's played," close quote. And that also tells me that just the mental hurdle to get that 4th win too. And also maybe the Florida Panthers were a little bit distracted with a lot of their families flying over across international borders 2,000 miles away. And that when you get that first taste of how close it is, you also have to go back mentally, the fact that you still have, it's a hockey game at the end of the day for them, and they're trying to just win a game. So that maybe that in the back of their heads, they were maybe thinking too much about what the prize is at the end.
Definitely the case. They always say the fourth one is the hardest one to come by for that reason. Edmonton definitely a real air of desperation to them and needing to prolong the series. And it's funny because given that there's 2 days between the games, the talking heads are acting like the Oilers tied the series. Like I saw a PK Subban's hit earlier today on Pat McAfee where he was talking about how the Panthers need to dramatically turn things around or the series is going to get away from them. Like they don't have a 2-game lead. Not to say the Oilers can't make this sketchy. The three times the Oilers lost 3 games in a row, they went on 5, 3, and 16-game winning streak. So if anybody is capable of doing it, it's definitely them. The one thing I want to say before we shift gears, looking ahead a little bit more, it feels like Edmonton probably exploded partly just because they were due. Anytime you go through 3 games, you only score, I think, 3 goals through the first 3 games. You're going to eventually get an explosion. It was just simply a matter of how long it was going to take. And you mentioned it. It was essential that McDavid get on the sheet. It was essential that Draisaitl rack up a couple of points. And then you got the auxiliary scoring. You got Janmark scoring on the shorty to kind of get them in the game. You got a McLeod goal in there. You got Holloway goals. Edmonton's depth has been reasonable in this series against Florida. They had all of the goals when they tried to mount the comeback the other night. It's been the Oilers' stars' inability to convert their chances, and I think that's a testament to Florida's defense and to Bob. And I know a lot of people struggle to realize that these are 2 active things going on at the same time. A lot of people are, oh, what's wrong with McDavid? What's wrong with Draisaitl? These are 2 things going at each other. They're in direct competition. If you're not acknowledging how good Florida's defense is, you're missing the boat. Yes, Florida has really great players up front. Their defense and Bob have been so lights out. Coming into the final, they had conceded 36 goals, something like that, and 36 goals in 18 games, almost 2 goals a game in today's league, which is so skewed towards offense. I'm happy they got on the sheet, but I think we got to give Florida credit. The defense has been great.
Yeah. 417 saves out of 507. 470 saves on 517 shots against for Sergei Bobrovsky so far in the postseason. So that's another thing for Bob and just, it's about 75% of their games have been 2 goals or less for the Panthers too. So that's another thing that I'm wondering if things are going to regress to the mean in game 5. So that's another thing that I'm looking out for. And you mentioned the Oilers, how they respond to their 3-game losing streaks. It's crazy because the Panthers also have a 3-game winning streak in each series throughout the postseason too. And another thing about it being hard to clinch a championship too is also the recent history too in the Stanley Cup Final. Vegas Golden Knights trying to clinch last year. Colorado in Tampa Bay, which they lost to before they clinched Game 6 in Tampa. Even the Lightning against the Canadiens, St. Louis too, and even the Panthers recently, Toronto last year, Tampa Bay this year, and even Boston in Game 5 too. So that's another thing for the Panthers for them, multiple cracks at it to get 1 game is still the mindset for them.
Absolutely, and we're kind of at the point in the series where you're not ready to say Edmonton's fully back in this. At least I'm not, unless they win 1 more game. Then at 3-2, it becomes a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
But it really does feel that if Edmonton's going to do something in the series, which we're going to touch on coming up next, it's going to have to be somebody doing something kind of extraordinary to kind of mitigate the advantages Florida does have, especially as the series shifts back to Florida, which we're going to tackle in the 3rd segment. But Edmonton having last change helped them a lot in game number 4, especially able to get some more favorable matchups. And that's been an issue at points in the playoffs. In the Vancouver series, they definitely had a harder time in Vancouver than in Edmonton because of last change. We will be right back after this quick break, and we are going to tackle the keys to success for each of these teams. So be sure to stick around. Summertime means baseball, Stanley Cup Finals, so much more, and you can bet it all with our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park to who's going to win the Conn Smythe. If you were so curious, the Edmonton Oilers are plus 110 on the money line tonight. The Florida Panthers are minus 132. The over-under for the game is 5.5 at minus 105. And if you were so curious, the most likely person to score a goal on FanDuel Sportsbook, Zach Hyman, plus 135. So if you want to get in on the action, visit fanduel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I want to thank everybody joining Armando and I on this Tuesday. It feels weird, this series, partly because the games have been very disjointed. Game 1, Edmonton got off to a really good start. First 10 seconds of the game, they have that great look. Then Florida scores 3 quick ones, and they're chasing the entire game. Game 2, Edmonton was around, but not really. Game 3, same kind of deal. And then finally, they explode, and it feels very hard to draw a through line from game to game in this series. They all feel really different from each other.
Yeah, I would say so, because I mean, the Oilers dominated possession in 3 out of the 4, 2 out of the 4 games. So it's been split on the Corsi for both teams too. But it's crazy what happens when you give up odd man rushes. So you throw that out of the window for in the case of Game 4 for the Panthers, and even in Game 1 for the Oilers there too. So that's another thing for how sometimes you could just get your chances for each, and sometimes they don't convert. I mean, for the Florida Panthers side of things, I mean, it's really come down to how they've been able to. You mentioned this. Forcing the Edmonton Oilers to play defense, but also one thing I've noticed is not only do I think I'm wondering of how the Panthers force the Oilers to play defense, but the Panthers are also very comfortable in the Oilers cycling the puck. I was looking through a lot of the highlights of the goals, and of the 12 goals that the Oilers have scored, only 2 of them have come off the cycle too, and those were the 2 goals in Game 3 at the end when it was 4-1 too. So that was another thing that I noticed too. So when you hear about me saying about forcing the Edmonton Oilers on the cycle, how do you think the Oilers can get more on the cycle?
I think that's the real conundrum, because that's not their game. I think Edmonton is set up that their top 6 is going to be transition and creating off the rush, and their bottom 6 is supposed to be the grouping that facilitates that. And the benefit to that is you're not playing defense and you're putting pressure on the other team. So even if you don't get particularly dangerous scoring chances, which, to your point, Edmonton's not great at getting looks off of the cycle, because they don't really have the personnel for it. You know, if Evander Kane was healthier, you would say he's probably their most conventional net front guy other than Hyman. It's not the same Corey Perry of 5-10 years ago who was really good in front of the net. Edmonton's struggles on the cycle, they're legitimate. That's not their preferred style. And those guys in that bottom 6, they don't play a lot. You know, you look at the times on ice in this series, they're creeping up for the big guns on Edmonton. It's going to be more difficult for them. And you don't want to tell, you know, it's kind of like driving a sports car. You don't want to do 55 in the right lane. And that's what you're doing when you tell McDavid or Draisaitl, hey, let's just cycle the puck here and make them play defense for a little bit. You want them to play their game, which you do, because they're 2 of the 5-10 best players in the entire world. You don't want to tell them to get away from what's worked for them their entire lives. But at the same time, the playoffs inherently benefit teams that can cycle because they're playing less defense. You know, I would argue that's been Florida's secret sauce here, is that they've made Bob so much more effective in this series because he hasn't had to do a ton. You know, yeah, he was great in game number 1. That was probably his best performance of the playoffs so far. But at large, in the playoffs at large, Florida hasn't asked Bob to do a ton. He's only had to make, 30-ish saves a game. They cycle so well. They don't have to play a ton of defense. And that's going to help you out every time. You know, I think, especially because that's what Florida's good at. If Florida were also more of a transition team, if it were the Florida team of 2 years ago, that would be a little bit more of up and down, back and forth. But being that Florida loves to muck it up, they want these games to be low scoring and defense first. I think that's a real problem for Edmonton. And the only reason it worked out for them in game 4 is Florida made some mistakes. When Florida's got that cycle game going, it's almost unbreakable.
Yeah, and when you think about just overall the changes that the front office made to get bigger and meaner for them too, and to just battle it out in the boards too. That's another thing. Florida lost their fair share of board battles in their own offensive zone too. So when you think about that, and then the defense pinching in a little bit too, and so you're thinking about the important thing for the Florida Panthers is also board battles too, and credit to the Oilers in Game 4. They really fought off that Panthers forecheck in Game 4.
It's really difficult because in your mind you have two options. When Florida's forecheck is going, you have two options. It's either your forwards have to come back even further than usual on your regroups, and that first pass has to be short. It's only 5-10 feet. So that way they're getting the puck away as the forechecker's bearing down on the defenseman. But that also invites, a second wave. That's kind of what Florida did against the Rangers in particular as that series went along. When the Rangers were struggling to break out, the Rangers went to shorter breakout passes, but Florida was still there on that first pass to mitigate it. Whereas with Edmonton, they're a little bit more of an organized regroup team where their forwards come back already. But when they get their bread and butter going, it is getting the puck to McDavid in space. It's getting the puck to McLeod or Holloway in space and kind of having them lead the rush out. And that's hard to do because Florida, they're so big, they're so strong, they are so long. They've got a lot of tall guys who really make it difficult to get through the neutral zone. And that's kind of the key here. When you're a transition team like Edmonton and you don't control the neutral zone, it's pretty much impossible to get to offense consistently. And when they've lost in this series, that's kind of been the problem for them, is that they can't get through the neutral zone with speed, which, as you opened up the segment saying, it forces them to cycle, it forces them to dump and chase, which they're just not as good at.
Yeah, and for Edmonton, especially in the first period, which that's where a majority of their scoring is, you're not getting the long change too. For Florida, that's really for them. It's crazy for them because you're not having that long change. So for Edmonton, it's really about getting the proper changes for them, while in the cases of a Bouchard win gets the puck and stretches it out to McDavid in space and getting them in transition too. So that's another thing that the Florida Panthers would need to look out for is just the responsible changes, because there's you're talking about too many men on the ice call in Game 4, which on 32 Thoughts they actually discussed that how it was Matthias Ekholm who actually called that too, and also one of them in transition where there was in the middle of a change off a breakout too by Edmonton. So that's another thing that the Florida Panthers would need to look out for, even though that one that on the miscommunication in Game 4 was in the long change period. But still, with how Edmonton starts games, that's really what you got to look for.
Edmonton is a lot better playing with a lead than from behind, and it's largely based on Skinner. Stuart Skinner is very volatile. He's very up and down. He was really good in Game 4. He had a couple of really good saves. The one save he had on Carter Verhaeghe when it was 1-1 still, and they eventually came back down and scored and got the lead, really kind of kept them in that game. And he's easy to malign because they ask a lot of him at points. And when Edmonton has a lead, he plays with a little bit less pressure on himself. And it feels like, at least anecdotally, that in front of him, they're a little bit looser. It's not as frantic. And when you're a goalie like Skinner, that's volatile, that's prone to the up and down, all it takes is one goal, and all of a sudden his shoulders are slumped over. Florida naturally smells blood and is great at cycling. And even if he's not conceding goals, they're really making him work. And once he starts to have to work harder, his technique usually starts to break down, and it becomes a lot more difficult for him to stay consistent. Armando and I will be right back. And then we'll talk all about how the Oilers can keep this series going or how the Panthers can close it out. So be sure to stick around.
Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. And a lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family the financial safety net to protect against the unknowns. And Policy Genius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policy Genius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over the other, so you can trust their guidance. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance policy with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com or click on the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you can save. That's policygenius.com.
Hello, friends, and thank you very much for hanging around on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. All right, let's start with the Panthers' perspective, both because that's your expertise, and B, I just yapped a lot for a lot of the last segment. So please, Armando, how do the Panthers close this out?
Well, before I get there, they are making. It looks like they're going to make one lineup change on the fourth line. So for the Panthers, their philosophy is don't change a winning lineup. So like we said in segment number 1, first loss in 20 days. So it looks like it's going to be Ryan Lomberg who is going to be inserted into the lineup, maybe a little bit of energy for them, for the Panthers necessary for them. It's crazy to think the former Calgary Flames connection, another one. So you have Tkachuk, Bennett, and Ryan Lomberg there now. And Bennett, Tkachuk, Ekblad also missed practice today. Tkachuk's been missing a few lately, so maybe he's playing hurt. The line that he's currently on with Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Bennett, their goal differential is -5 right now. Matthew Tkachuk hasn't scored in 15 games, so that's going to be another thing that you're getting contributions from the tennis of Tarasenko's. You're getting redirections too. Game 3, you saw Sam Reinhart, Tarasenko in Game 4 too. So that's also for the Florida Panthers what they're going to need, because they have gotten in front to throw Stuart Skinner off too. But Paul Maurice said that also Ekblad, Bennett, and Tkachuk, after missing practice, that they're good to go. So really, it's gonna go down to just continuing to take the eyes away from Stuart Skinner too, because it's crazy. Because we mentioned the rush chances, but Florida has also gotten their chances off the rush too, because of responding to the Edmonton Oilers play too. So they're not forcing off the rush, but they're just taking from what's given to them. And they worked on 2-on-1 drills in practice. So it's a little bit of alarms where it came off for them in Game 4 that definitely they look to. Hopefully they're looking to clean up.
You mentioned that, and after Game 1, there was the natural inclination of, the Oilers had possession, but Florida won, and Florida's going to tighten up. And Game 2 was probably their best defensive game of the series, where they gave Edmonton pretty much nothing. That was as low event and boring a game as you could have with as much star power as there was. So you would expect something similar here. Based on Edmonton scoring 8 goals, you would expect this game, the next one, to be tighter, lower scoring, less room, and a little bit more high variance, where, as you said, all it takes is one deflection, one bounce, and that really swings it. And that's something Florida, frankly, is better at, is that net front play. Because, we talked about it before in regards to cycle play. It's the same boat with deflections, rebounds, whatever you want to call them, those second chance scoring opportunities. Other than Zach Hyman, they don't really have a net front guy who's good at that. And that's an area where Florida in the Oilers end has been able to take advantage, because as good of a player as Evan Bouchard is, he's on the smaller side. You can definitely, Florida's got some big boys. They can leverage their bodies. They can take away space and make those guys uncomfortable. And that's what they've done a good job of, is forcing Cody Ceci, forcing Evan Bouchard, hitting on Broberg, hitting on the smaller defensemen, forcing those guys to play in a way that they're not comfortable with. As for the Oilers, the other end of the spectrum, they're going to need the special teams, because ultimately that's kind of what gets them going. It's not so much that they can't do it at 5-on-5. It's that they have the best player in the world. And when their power play is going, it just gives them so much more breathing room. We talked about the idea with Skinner before of he just needs a lead and then he's a lot better. It's the same kind of boat where if Edmonton's special teams aren't going, then they really struggle at 5-on-5, because for whatever reason, the way they play at 5-on-5 really flows off of their cohesion and their effectiveness in transition. And when the Oilers' power play has struggled in these playoffs, it's typically been because they can't get established in the offensive zone. And Florida's kill is really good at that. As soon as you enter the zone with possession on Florida, they immediately are on you to try and break it up. There's always 4 Panthers in the frame, and it's something the Oilers have struggled with, because then, like we just said before in the first segment, it forces them to dump the puck in. It forces them to go get it, and that's what Florida's great at.
Yeah, and puck support on their breakouts too. That's another thing for them. And thankfully for the Panthers, their only power play goal against was on a 5-on-3. where it took a while even for the Edmonton Oilers to get on the score sheet on that specific power play. I feel like even then when they had the bodies on the ice, they weren't really breaking out of that structure. I mean, like I said in my recent episode, it's when you don't have a defenseman there to clean it up there, it's almost an inevitability when you have so many great players on that side and you have and on a 5-on-3. But for the Panthers, I mean, for this one, it's also later in the series. That's also something I really think about the extracurriculars. I mean, you see Bennett and McDavid going after each other too in Game 4. So I think this is going to be the most disciplined kind of hockey game that in so far in the series. And also I think that favors the Panthers too when it comes to going there, because I mean, you said that they need to get their 5-on-5 going. I just think about Game 6 of the conference final against the Rangers too, how all the penalties were called in the first period. I wonder how that's going to be, like how the players are going to adjust too. So that's another thing that I'm going to be looking for, because it's the alarms are set off for the Panthers, but the Edmonton Oilers on the other side know they can't lose.
So instead of asking, what you expect to happen, blah, 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 I'll ask this. What does it mean for the Panthers to close this out on home ice?
Everything. I mean, outside of big picture, you don't want to go back to Edmonton. You don't. I get there's that chance to clinch on the road too, and the Panthers are a great road team. Best road penalty kill in the league this year. But you're playing in dangerous waters if you don't win at home. But as far as if you get the job done, everything, because I think of 2014, that opening night in 2014, where there were 7,400 some odd fans in that one. And that was the first year of the Viola ownership too. To go from that, when you were kind of starting your rebuild, maybe like year 4 of it, because Panthers had 3 first-round picks in 2010. And to go from that to 3 players remaining from Dale Talon's tenure, it would be everything for the Panthers for them to bring the Stanley Cup home. And also, in South Florida sports history, it's only happened 3 times where a championship has been clinched at home: 97 Marlins and 2012 and 2013 Miami Heat. So this would be something special for the community of South Florida, who hasn't seen a championship in 11 years.
You mentioned it from the Florida perspective, and I'll invert it for the Edmonton perspective. You win Game 5 and you get them back in Alberta, then it's a series. Mm-hmm. All you got to do is win one more, and you're right back in this now. You give yourself life, and that's always how it is in these series. Whenever you're the underdog, the longer the series goes, typically that benefits you historically, that the longer the series drags on, the more you start to believe, and the more you start to feel like, okay, we went from needing to win 4 straight to 3 straight. You win tonight. Now we only need to win 2 straight games. That becomes a lot more practical and a lot more doable. You don't need as much to go right for you. If nothing else, the last thing I want to say before we get out of here, I just want one good game, please. Just one game that's not really weird. The blowout, fine. Edmonton needed it to get on the board to keep the series going. I would love a good hockey game tonight. I don't want a rock fight. I expect it to be a Florida Panthers driven rock fight of 2-1, 3-2, and whatever happens on the 3rd goal to win the game. I would just love one good game.
I don't know. The fan of me doesn't know if my anxiety levels can take that.
That's fair.
But I have to take that hat off for a little bit. And yes, I do agree. I do want a good hockey game and just battle it out. And also for it to be earned too. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't be earned if they blow them out one way or the other, or if the Panthers or if the Edmonton Oilers blow out the Panthers in Game 5. But I just really want to see maybe a super clutch moment, or maybe that guy that you did not expect to score too. So who knows if we see that on Tuesday night.
You're looking for your Fedotenko, I understand. You're looking for your 2-goal game from like the 10th forward on your team, like he did in 2004 against Calgary. I understand the vision. But that will just about do it for this special crossover edition of Locked On Oilers and Locked On Panthers. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcast. Oilers friends, go subscribe to Locked On Panthers, throw the show a 5-star review. The reviews help us creators out immensely. Go over on YouTube, subscribe, alarm bell, all that good stuff. Let us know who you think is going to win Game 5 tonight. Talk to you guys real soon.